Hi, I'm John Knight Lundwall, and welcome to Myth and the Bible. This is our second presentation on the Ascent of Elijah, 2 Kings chapters 1 and 2. In this presentation, we will go over the mythological analysis of certain key motifs within this text. I promise you this is new stuff that you probably have not heard before, and some of it is very fascinating. So please watch to the very end, because some of the most ancient clues are revealed towards the very end. Like, subscribe, share, comment, and join us on the journey. In our previous lecture, we went over the text of chapters 1 and 2. Chapter 1 was a frame story, and chapter 2 was a mirror image of it. In chapter 1, we learn that King Ahaziah of Israel fell through a hole in his palace chamber to his bed and then to his death. There was an oracle of Yahweh given, and then he was succeeded to his throne by the brother. In the next chapter, we have Elijah ascending into a heaven in inverse image, with Elisha succeeding to the prophetic throne. That Elijah meets three groups of the Ben Navi, the sons of the prophets, and most peculiarly, the last group of the sons of the prophets are number 50. And this is the first time they are numbered, and these are the sons of the prophets that witness Elijah's ascent into heaven. Now, in the logic of the parallelisms between chapters 1 and 2, we are left to believe that these 50 sons of the prophets are simply a mirror image of the 50 soldiers that Ahaziah sends to clear out Elijah. And that is pretty much where everyone has left the comparison. The problem is in the religions and myth systems of the ancient Near East and Mediterranean, there is a sacred group of 50 that repeatedly show up with the hero or initiate to help them ascend into heaven. Well, technically, they help the hero descend into the underworld, which is a precursor to ascending into heaven. And so one is left wondering if the biblical scribes were actually punning on the religious cosmovision of the neighboring religions, and that the true metaphor of the 50 sons of the prophets witnessing the ascent of Elijah was a much deeper social and religious commentary against the religious cosmovision of their neighbors. This is the subject we are going to explore. In the ancient Near East, there was a grand myth cycle called the Epoch of Gilgamesh. It is a story that is found in Akkadian, Sumerian, Babylonian. It is a culture hero well known amongst all the cities and religious cultures of the day. Gilgamesh has several labors that he must perform. And one of the perhaps the greatest labor is his descent into the underworld. He has a friend named Enkidu who dies. And Gilgamesh is inconsolable, and he wants to bring Enkidu back to life, and he realizes the only way to do that is to obtain the secrets of eternal life in the underworld. Well, that's an impossible thing to do. No mortal can survive a trip through the underworld. Gilgamesh decides to make the journey anyway. He's half mortal, half divine. And so he descends into the underworld. Well, his patron god Utu, or Shamash, the sun god, gives Gilgamesh a gift, 50 helpers who act as guides and helpers through the underworld. They help him defeat a great giant. They help him discover mountain passes, 7 mountain passes. And in one scene, they oar him or pull him in a boat across an impassable sea in the underworld. Now, sometimes this group of 50 in our mythological texts are numbered 7. So sometimes 50, sometimes 7. This is so because the 50 called the Anunna were led by a group of 7 amongst them called the Igigi. This latter term is untranslatable, but they're the 7 leaders of the 50 Anunna, or Anunnaki. In one text we read, "Then came the warriors, all sons of one mother. They were 7 in number." So these are the 7 leaders of the group of 50 that helped Gilgamesh through the underworld. "In heaven they sparkle, on earth they know the path. May they show him the way." So this group of 7 are knowers of the way between the worlds. And really interestingly, they sparkle in heaven, which is our clearest indication that they are probably stars. But which ones? There are several candidates. Perhaps the 7 planetary spheres, perhaps the 7 stars of the Big Dipper, perhaps the Pleiades, but we're not told. None of this was written down in a schematic. This was part of a sacred and secret mythological system. They certainly were well known in the ancient world, but never written down. And what doesn't get written down gets lost, so we no longer have the identification. In another, in the same text, the 7 leaders of the Anunna are described, and thought I would read the description of the first 2 leaders because it's very important. The first, their eldest brother, had the paws of a lion and the claws of an eagle. The second was a slithering snake. Now the other 5 leaders are described as serpentine, but they hold powers over nature. But the description of these first 2 give us the icons of a lion, eagle, and snake. And being that they're humanoid figures, that would add a humanoid visage. Well, this is the iconography of the Greek Sphinx, and Near Eastern Sphinxes for that matter. Interestingly enough, the Greek Sphinx was most commonly placed at tombs, for the Greek Sphinx was the guardian and guide of the dead through the underworld. And here we have this group of 50 as guides and guardians of the dead. Here is a depiction of the Anunna. In one Neo-Assyrian hymn, we find that a description of a boat that sails between the worlds, and this description is very interesting. Quote, 7 times 7 lions of the field occupy its deck. Its house, its ascent, is a mountain that gives rest to the heart. May the ship before thee cross the canal. May the ship behind thee sail over its mouth. Within thee may the heart rejoicing make holiday. The ship is occupied, oared by 7 times 7 lions of the field. But what's more interesting is the number. 7 times 7, of course, is 49. A group leader would make 50, and we'll return to this image shortly. But this probably gives us why the 50 are led by 7. Each of the 7 leaders are in turn over 7 of the Anunna. Well, Gilgamesh isn't the only culture hero that receives or is compared with a group of 50 in the underworld. We get this same image in the Anunna text. In the descent into the underworld, Anunna, who is the queen of heaven, sometimes called Ishtar, she must descend to the underworld through 7 gates. And this is part of Near Eastern cosmology. The underworld had 7 gates, and we find this theme actually in Egyptian and Greco-Roman cosmologies. At each of the 7 gates, Anunna must give up a token of power and authority, which is one of the items of her clothing. So by the time she passes the 7th gate, she stands completely naked in the underworld, where she is smitten, turned into a corpse, hung on a hook, and where she slowly is resurrected. In most of these scenes, the Anunna show up, sometimes as 50, sometimes as 7. They are there to witness the death and resurrection of Anunna. And in one text we read, the Anunna, the 7 judges, rendered their decision against her. They looked at her. It was the look of death. They spoke to her. It was the speech of anger. They shouted at her. It was the shout of heavy guilt. The afflicted woman was turned into a corpse, and the corpse was hung on a hook. Well, this is a very fierce image, and it shows that the Anunna are not just guides, but guardians and judges in the underworld. And if one is not prepared for the journey through the underworld, they become like the Sphinx, the creature that tears the unprepared apart. Well, this myth complex descends into Greece, and perhaps the best well-known hero that descends to the underworld with the help of 50 helpers is Jason and the Argonauts. Of course, the myth of Jason goes, there's a king of a kingdom who receives an oracle saying that a man wearing one shoe will supplant you, who enters your kingdom. Well, a few days later, Jason has lost one of his sandals, and he enters the kingdom, and the king recognizes, here's the man who will supplant me. So he gives Jason a task. He says, if you do this one labor for me, I will surrender up the kingdom. You can have it. And Jason agrees. Unfortunately, the one task he's given is to retrieve the golden fleece from the underworld. And this is analogous to retrieving the secrets of eternal life from the underworld. The problem is, no mortal can do this. Only the gods can do this. And so the king knows that Jason isn't going to survive, but Jason agrees. He's going to do it. In this right image, here we have Jason, and he's collecting his 50 Argonauts, sailors. And of course, this is Heracles. Heracles is one of Jason's Argonauts. So that's a pretty good sign. If you got Heracles on your team, things are going to go pretty well. Well, actually, things don't go that well. It's a very arduous journey. But Jason does descend into the underworld with the help of his 50 sailors and retrieves the golden fleece and becomes king. Of note, the 50 sailors are led by Orpheus. And this becomes very important. We'll address this shortly. All are initiated into the mysteries of Samothrace. This is a mystery cult, and we don't know much about it, but we do know that the people who were initiated into this cult were initiated with the promise of a blessed afterlife, with instructions probably of how to negotiate the underworld. In any case, Jason's quest for the Golden Fleece is analogous to Gilgamesh's quest in the underworld. Well, Jason isn't the only Greek hero who is associated with 50 and journeying through the underworld to obtain eternal life. We get this same imagery in the labors of Heracles, though this imagery is put into the background and into shadow. Three labors in particular. The second labor of Heracles, where he must overcome the Lunarian Hydra. The Hydra has, is this serpentine dragon figure who has several heads, and every time Heracles cuts a head off, two grow in its place. Well, in one of the traditions, the Lunarian Hydra, who is basically a guardian of the underworld, has 50 heads. And the temple dedicated to Heracles, Robert Graves tells us, was operated by 50 priestesses. And so here we get this same image. In the last two labors of Heracles, we have in this lower right image a depiction of a silver bowl, which has been lost, by the way, but the depiction remains. The labors of Heracles, and over here we see Cerberus, the dog of the underworld. He has one head, but is covered in snake heads. Well, in Greek iconography, Cerberus is most often represented as a three-headed dog. That's the image we have over here in the lower left. He's a three-headed dog because there were three roads in the underworld that Cerberus guarded. There was the road between the mortal realm and underworld, a road that led up to the Elysian fields or the blessed world, and a road that led down to Tartarus, to the deep bowels of hell. Right? And Cerberus stood at the crossroads, each head guarding one of the roads. It should be noted that Hesiod gives us our earliest description of Cerberus, and according to Hesiod, Cerberus has 50 heads. Well, in the 11th and 12th labor of Heracles, Heracles must retrieve the golden apples of the Hesperides. This is analogous to the golden fleece that Jason must retrieve. And in the 12th labor, Heracles drags Cerberus up from the underworld. This is a motif showing that Heracles is completely victorious over death. And in fact, of all the Greek heroes, Heracles is the only one that receives godhood. He ascends to the throne of heaven as a god through apotheosis. And so his labors tend to show that they are the process by which a mortal becomes divine. So now we have a collection of different traditions. Gilgamesh's descent in the underworld, the judges of Anunna in the underworld, Jason who sells down into the underworld, and Heracles and his encounters in the underworld with the Hydra and with Cerberus. In all these traditions, the number 50 is associated with the guardians, guides, and helpers who help the hero to the underworld, through the underworld, who, in Anunna's case, judge the hero but witness her resurrection in the underworld. So I suppose one of the criticisms at this point scholars could make was that all these sacred 50 who help the hero through the underworld they are markedly different than the 50 sons of the prophets who witness Elijah's ascent into heaven. First off, Elijah isn't going to the underworld. He's ascending straight up into heaven. And therefore, this comparison might seem stretched. To that, I say, bullocks. How often do the Hebrew scribes take the traditions of their neighbors and turn them on their heads? And the answer is often. And so the Hebrew scribes are showing, I think, that Elijah does not need to descend into the underworld to obtain his secrets of life. Yahweh provides that directly. And it's also, again, on this pun of going up and down. All these heroes in the ancient world had to go down to obtain the secrets of life before they could go up to the throne of heaven. Elijah does not. He goes up, and it's his enemies who fall down. And so ultimately, perhaps the reason why all these up-down puns are occurring in chapters 1 and 2 is because the Hebrew scribes are punning on this cosmography, that Yahweh will lead his followers up, and that the religious gods of the surrounding terrain require their followers to go down before they can go up. Well, for me at least, this leaves one question. Why 50 stewards? Why a company of 50? Why is 50 required? 7 sort of makes sense because, again, a couple of our texts indicate that the 7 guides in the underworld sparkle in the sky. We have to understand, in ancient cosmology, the underworld was a region in the sky you could see. The heavenly world was the circumpolar stars. The material world, or mythologic earth, was the integration of the horizon into the sky to the celestial equator, and include the band of sky below the ecliptic to the horizon. And the underworld were the stars that were below the horizon that sometimes could be seen rising and setting, depending on your latitude. The 3 regions of ancient cosmology, upper world, middle world, lower world, were analogous to 3 regions in the sky you could see with observational astronomy. We'll return to this theme. So why 50? Well, this was a question that, I actually spent about 6 months trying to solve in the library and on JSTOR and reading as many essays and articles that I could find. And it turns out, well, I don't know if I've answered the question, but I've come across some really good clues. Let's examine a few of them. The first great clue is in our Greek drama. I spoke of the Greek drama in one of my concept videos. The earliest Greek dramas were not like theatrical dramas we are used to. Here's an artist's rendition on the lower left of the Greek theater. Now, the original theaters wouldn't have been anywhere near as grandiose. Methinks this is a Victorian artist. But what we do see is this large orchestral space and then two stages. Well, in the early theaters, the stage was actually a small platform, and the biggest performance space was the orchestra. And this is where you see these guys here. This is where the priests of the Temenos, the sacred spot where the play occurred, would recite the lines of the chorus. And in early Greek drama, half the lines are the lines of the chorus, and the other lines are given by two or three actors who play different parts by wearing different theatrical masks. But the largest performance space was the Greek chorus. The Greek chorus was a series of priests who, here in our right, we have this urn, Greek urn, and we see these choral dancers. They held little staves, and they circumambulated around an altar in the orchestra space, singing and chanting their lines. Well, this is so strange. Why were they doing all of this? Well, the origin of Greek drama is Greek dromenon. And this chorus of, theatrical, dramatic priests descended from the ancient temple cults. More interestingly, in the earliest Greek dramas, there were 50 priests who sung and danced the lines of the chorus. The original number of the chorus was 50. And this is our first hint that the 50 helpers of our mythologic heroes, whatever their archetype in the deified drama of the heavens, probably had a corollary of 50 priests or priestesses who operated the temples and who gave the initiations, who helped the people traverse the worlds. Again, we will continue to deal with this theme. Here we have Orpheus, who leads Jason's Argonauts, and he's the leader on the boat, and he has his lyre, because actually the Argonauts make their way through the underworld using the music of Orpheus. It is Orpheus's music that overcomes the music of the sirens, and it's Orpheus's music that pacifies Cerberus. Orpheus dealt with the Orphic mysteries, which is a religious structure in the ancient Greco-Roman world where people were initiated to travel through the underworld. In the Orphic mysteries, people were buried with gold tablets with instructions written on them telling them how to get through the underworld. Right? But the point is that the Orphic mysteries always included song and dance. Now, we're not sure what happened. None of these things were written down. We just get little scraps and crumbs and instances of what was going on. But what we know is that in all the mystery cults of ancient Greece, music and dance was central to the initiation. One danced their way through the initiation. In the mysteries of Samothrace, one was initiated surrounded by a chorus of 50 priests or priestesses. And their journey through the underworld was accompanied by this chorus of 50. And this is, of course, analogous to the 50 choral dancers of Greek drama. They share the same culture unit. In any case, here in the lower right, Orpheus is strumming his lyre. He has power over the animals and birds and nature. And it is Orpheus with his music, song, and dance that allows one to journey through the underworld. Here we have depictions of two cult objects of the Orphic mysteries. These were bulls. This lower left one is a drawing of an alabaster bull, and this lower right one is of a silver bull, I believe. In each case, so they were used during Orphic initiations. We don't know how, but on this lower left one, we see 16 Orphic initiates completely naked like Anunna in the Underworld, making arm and hand gestures through rituals that, again, we've lost, we don't know. But there is a surviving inscription on the circumference of the bowl. Some of it has worn off, but what has been retranslated tells us that these initiates are circling through the spheres of heaven. So we know that they're on a cosmic journey through the next world, performing their initiations, and the fact that they are in a circle around the altar indicates that there is a song and dance involved. Certainly in this lower right Orphic bowl, it's slightly different. The center is occupied by the Magna Mater, the goddess of the underworld, whose womb and tomb were synonymous, but one descended to the tomb and was reborn through the womb of the goddess. And we also have 16 figures, but unlike these 16 figures, these figures here relate to the journey of the dead. Here we have Orpheus, the deceased. He comes down to Persephone and Demeter, the goddesses in the underworld. We've got the king of the underworld, a sort of Hades here. Castor and Pollux, who are stellar guides of the soul. And the journey ends at the apex of heaven. They've gone down and have come up with Apollo and his lyre. The lyre, of course, connect Orpheus and Apollo, both musical actors in this grand celestial drama. In short, in these mystery cults, one was initiated to transcend the afterworld through secret initiations and song and dance. And this brings us to an interesting bronze plaque dated probably around 800 BCE. It's early first millennium BCE. Again, the plaque has been lost. We just have its description and its drawing. It was bought by a man, Parity, an antiquities dealer. The context of where it was found is not known. And we have the drawing of what the plaque was. The plaque depicts the Assyrian cosmos. And here we have Lamashti, the underworld goddess. She's kneeling on a horse, a psychopomp, on a river. Down here, this is the river of the underworld, kind of like the Styx. She's holding two serpents, whelps suck at her breasts. And she is the goddess of disease, sickness, miscarriage. Sort of a malevolent figure and certainly a fierce figure. Right above her, we have this man on an altar or couch. His arm is raised up in the air. Beside him are two priests wearing fish skins, and beside him here are two lion-headed priests joining hands, and their legs are in movement, indicating some sort of ritual procession or dance. On the top register, this is the Assyrian heaven, and the symbols up here, sun, star, moon, show us we are in the eternal heavenly world. And it is guarded or guided with 7 lion-headed figures. This reminds us of that Neo-Assyrian hymn where 7 times 7 lions occupy the deck. Well, this is also the Agigi, the 7 leaders of the Anunna. Here are 7 lion-headed figures. You can't really see it in this image, but their feet are apart in a ritualized processional dance. And the entire plaque is overseen by an Assyrian sphinx. Here we have our eagle talons, our serpent tail, our eagle wings. And so the sphinx looks over the Assyrian cosmos with its underworld, midworld, upper world. What was this plaque? Well, originally, scholars believed it was a resurrection scene, and this man on the couch or altar was dead, and he, with his arm lifted up, is being indicated that he is being resurrected and raised up. This view has been deconstructed now, and they think that it's a healing amulet because the goddess here is a goddess of disease, and they think the man now is being healed from some sickness. And the bottom line is it doesn't matter whether it's a resurrection scene or a healing scene. The Assyrian cosmos is brought into play in both cases. And in the Greco-Roman mysteries, it's important to note that there were certain caves in which doctors performed their healings, and it's the same caves in which the mystery initiations took place. One ascended through the cosmos to get healed because one was journeying to the other side to bring back the powers of healing that existed in the eternal world. And so, we don't do this now, but that was part of the healing process in a lot of these hypogeums. And so, in any case, we have this image of either a man being resurrected or healed, and with 7 lion-headed stewards doing a processional dance, also associated with the Sphinx. And when I was in Egypt, I just happened to be in the tomb of Tausert, 12th century BCE, and we get an analogous scene. This is a resurrection scene. Here is Khnum, the ram-headed god, and there's a pyramid up here split in two. The sun is being dragged up from the underworld by the Khepre beetle, and basically the deceased is rising back up to life. Well, interestingly enough, on the perimeter of the split pyramid, where the sun rises from the underworld to the upper world, we have 7 Khnum masked priests doing a processional dance around the pyramid. And so this is an analogous scene to these 7 lion-headed lions who guard or guide the upper world in the Assyrian cosmos. So, what do we have then? We have, by the way, this image here is a Greek bull of the Nereids. They were the sea nymphs. And in Book 13 of the Odyssey, Odysseus lands in Ithaca and discovers a cave guarded by the Nereids. The Nereids, of course, are 50 in number. And the cave in the Odyssey has 2 paths, one going to the underworld, to the realm of the dead, only that gods can travel, and one going up to the realm of the blessed. So here again we have 50 dancing Nereids who guard the underworld. And so we now have enough motifs to show that the 50 helpers of the heroes who transcend through the next world probably had a corollary with 50 priests or priestesses who danced in the initiations in temple precincts, and the dance itself was part of the initiation which helped the person negotiate the next world. And in fact, 7 times 7 makes sense because there are 7 heavenly spheres and 7 notes in an octave. If every leader of the Anunna represented an octave and a planetary sphere, in order to travel through all the heavens, one did a dance with the 7 heavenly spheres and the 7 octaves. 7 times 7 giving you 49 notes, a choral leader being the 50th note. In other words, 7 octaves are completed at the 50th note. So they're analogically performing a ritual dance using a song and a chant through 7 octaves representing the 7 heavens. Of course, this is speculative, but it does make sense now why there would be so many people in a choral dance that are required to attend the initiate as he or she goes through the next world. Now this brings us to ancient cosmological view. In one of the mysteries of the ascent of Elijah is that there is no mention of a heavenly realm until we get to Elijah. So this is really bizarre. It's a bizarre feature of the Old Testament. And of course, most scholars assume that, in fact, the Israelites didn't believe in a heavenly realm. Here is your standard lower left image of Hebrew cosmology. You have the upper world, which is the sky surrounded by a dome of water. Above the water was the eternal firmament where God dwelled. There was the earth and there were mountains that held up the sky, and then there was a low subterranean space, Sheol. Sometimes the dead are said to travel there, and then there's the great deep, or the waters below. So according to our standard view of Hebrew cosmology, the universe was sort of an inverted snow globe, right? With water on the outside, land on the inside, mountains holding up the water, and no real heavenly, God existed on the outside, but human beings weren't said to make it to the outside. And then there is this subterranean dark space. So this is what we get. I think this view of Hebrew cosmology, first off, it's composed off so little data that we just don't know. But I also think it's just bizarrely insufficient and a complete caricature. Ancient Israelite cosmology was probably very similar to the cosmology surrounding it. Certainly there would be differences, adaptations, changes, but that wouldn't change some basic features of what everyone thought and knew as you existed in the ancient world. For example, there really were mountains holding up the sky, but in Babylonian cosmology, those mountains were constellations. Meshu, which was the constellation basically of Gemini, and it was the stars at Taurus Gemini, and I've got this located here, that represented one mountain and gate to the next world. And then on the other side of the sky was Scorpio, and Gilgamesh descends into the underworld at a mountain pass guarded by scorpion men. And so this is the other mountain that holds up the sky. Well, it turns out Taurus, Gemini, Scorpio, Sagittarius, it is this region in the sky where the ecliptic crosses the Milky Way. And sure enough, these are the regions in the sky that hold up the sky. The Milky Way being the eternal waters that surround the earth. And so all of these are actually celestial images that are brought into mythological metaphor that make it into our text as, this kind of silly schematic. In this lower right image, this is Mithraic cosmology, which is rather late, but Mithraism was the mystery cult of the Romans, contemporary with Christianity. In fact, in the first century, Christianity was just a bunch of teeny little sects, and Mithraism dominated the Roman world. What we can say is that on the Mithraic Troctony scenes, these are ritual scenes in their temples, we get images of bull, scorpion, lion, dog, hydra, crater, crow. These are all constellations in the sky. And they occupy the two gates. This would be Taurus and Scorpio. And the ecliptic is the line around the sky that the planets Sun and Moon follow. It's also where the zodiacal constellations are. And so if your two mountains that hold up the sky are Taurus, Scorpio, at right angles is Leo and Aquarius, which is where we're looking from in this image. And here you have your image of your Sphinx, lion, serpent, eagle. Sometimes this is Aquila, the eagle. Humanoid. In Near Eastern sphinxes, the bull was often represented. Well, these are the four corners of the cosmos that define cosmic space. And the whole point is, apparently in some of these traditions, one could ascend to the heavenly throne, which are the circumpolar stars here. There's your Big Dipper and your North Star. Only by a correct ritual orientation and journey through the cosmos. Now, look, this is highly debated. A lot of scholars would disagree. And I am quoting different cosmologies, Mithraism, Orpheism. These are late Greco-Roman mysteries. Certainly, Babylon, Assyrian, Sumerian are steeped in this religious cosmology from which the Greeks and Romans inherited. And we certainly know in Egypt, the entire journey of the dead is a heavenly journey from beginning to end. And so this construct actually exists. The Egyptians didn't invent it either. They inherited it. So this is all developed before even writing is invented. So in any case, we're dealing with a radical different cosmology in these myth systems. Well, now let's end up, again, this is a little long lecture, but what we get then is Gilgamesh, Anunna, Jason, Heracles all must descend, go down into the underworld so that they can find the secrets of life and ascend up into heaven. Elijah just goes straight up to heaven. And here is the ultimate pun. Yahweh does not require this grand cosmography. If you are a follower of Yahweh like Elijah, you can ascend into heaven. Now, did they believe this? Well, our text doesn't say. And if they did believe it, they wouldn't have written it down. So we wouldn't know. But the imagery here of the 50 sons of the prophets in the ascent of Elijah, at least plays on this group of 50 and the surrounding religious cosmovisions and how those heroes had to descend and ascend into the heavens. I argue this is what makes the last miracle of Elisha, Elijah's acolyte, make sense. Now, when Elijah ascends to heaven, right before his acolyte, his Padawan, Elisha, asks Elijah, may I please have a double portion of your spirit? When you pass along, may I have twice the power that you have been given? Now, this is such a radical request because Elijah is the greatest prophet in Israel. He raises the dead, he heals the water, he splits the sea, and he calls down pillars of fire at will. What would a double portion of the Spirit look like? What could Elisha do? I mean, that would be infinite power. And so Elijah says, look, if you witness my ascent into heaven, and if God permits it, so be it. Well, Elisha does witness Elijah's ascent into heaven, and he does get Elijah's mantle, and in fact, his first miracle thereafter is to split the river Jordan. And this indicates that Elisha is the new Moses. He's received the full power of Elijah, because Elijah's last miracle was to split the river Jordan. And so Elisha now is fully endowed with the powers of Elijah. This also implies he has received the double portion of the Spirit. If you're paying attention to the text, now you're sitting at the edge of your seat. Because now you want to know, what does that look like? Elijah could command pillars of fire. What is Elisha going to do? Well, in the parallelistic structure of this narrative, Elisha performs 3 miracles. And we expect the first 2 to be great, but the last one to be magnificent. The revelation of the double portion of the Spirit. We have no idea what it's going to look like. Well, sure enough, Elisha performs 3 miracles after he collects the mantle of Elijah. The first miracle is he splits the rivers of Jordan. The second miracle is he goes to Jericho and heals the waters of Jericho, which means he heals the land of Jericho. He turns the land fertile. I mean, this is an ancient mythological motif. You find it all the time in the Arthurian legends, where the Fisher King, the one true king, makes the land fertile, and the false king makes the land a wasteland. So now that Elisha has healed the land, we know he is the one true prophet of Israel, the prophet of Yahweh. But now there's a third miracle. We know there's going to be a third miracle because the entire narrative is told in 3s, and we expect it to be the double portion of the Spirit. We have no idea what it's going to be. What is it going to be? Well, it turns out, whatever it is, it's the apex of his power, the apex of the miracle cycle. And it's Elisha calling forth 2 she-bears to slaughter 42 youths. This is so anticlimactic that it's as if the entire narrative were written by Zack Snyder. What is that about? In fact, many early rabbis thought this narrative just was a great disappointment, and certainly wasn't true as in historically true. They had an idiomatic saying, a grand tale, a fish tale, a fairy tale was often referred to as likely as forests and bears. And that idiomatic saying referred to this narrative here, where 2 bears come out of the forest and kill 42 youths. And, none of the rabbis believed that this was actually happened. And turns out the motif makes sense if the 2 bears are the throne of heaven. Again, by the time this text is being written, 4th, 3rd century BCE, the Greco-Roman circumpolar stars were represented by the Big Dipper and Little Dipper, the Big Bear and the Little Bear. This was the eternal realm. This was the throne of heaven. And if Elijah could command pillars of fire down from the sky to destroy his enemies, Elisha, with a double portion of the Spirit, could command the very throne of heaven down from the skies to dispatch his enemies. In my view, that's the only interpretation that makes sense. Otherwise, it really is just a tale of forests and bears. In short, the apex of heaven comes down to slay the enemies of Yahweh, which is the rising generation of the next priests of Baal. Right? Up, down, the highest up has just come down to eliminate the next generation of the opponents of Israel. Well, that's our mythological analysis. Hope you learned something. Please leave comments. Agree, disagree, like, share, and I'll see you next time.